Welcome to Ask Dr. Doreen. We're here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh.
Good morning.
Who's looking all wonderful today. And if you don't know who she is, I'm so glad that you're here because she is a true expert in the field of autism, having been working in this field for approaching a really mind-blowing number. Is it
40 years will be next year.
I keep wanting to say that, and then I stumble over because I'm like, no, it can't possibly be almost 40 years. Oh, okay, but we're not only taking your word for it. There's documentation to prove it. Big documentation to prove it. But so she's been working in this field for so long with so many different individuals, varied individuals, everything from very small children up through senior citizens, and she also works with families to help to support us. You've been truly a visionary.
Thank you very much.
And have created a world in which our kids have a much better chance
I hope so.
of being who they were meant to be.
Thank you.
Which is, that makes me want to well up because I have one of those kids.
Makes me want to well up.
I have one of those kids, and every single day that I see my kid be able to do something, I just want you to know that you are always included in our prayers.
Thank
because
you so much,
as with so many other families, it's amazing what you've been able to do, and you're nowhere near done. Thank goodness.
Thank you.
So we're thrilled that you're here and that you're going to answer people's questions. We like to remind everybody, a little disclaimer at the start of the show, that there is no expert in this field or any other field that could give individual specific advice in this format. You just can't do it, right? But having said that, Dr. Granpeesheh takes your questions. She answers them with the beautiful mind that she has and the wealth of knowledge that she has to give you insights into what you might ask, what might be the next step, what, when you get to the expert that's local to you, what might happen there. It really sheds light on the subject. We all learn at your feet, which is wonderful.
Thank you so much.
And I wanted to say too that last week and you can be writing in your questions right now, even though I can't get them, Samantha can get them and she can ferry them to me. Last week when you were here, we had a bunch of back and forth with a bunch of parents, and you left before I got a chance to say to you that several people wrote in and said thank you so much. And I included one of them on here who said, thank you so much, Dr. Doreen. This has been a big help.
That's great.
They said that they were also in Florida because we had two different moms that were writing to us from Florida. And one who said that she's willing to help the other mom too, and that she also is a skills user. So we wanted to say that. Okay, I wanted to start with a question right here about a 9-year-old. My 9-year-old with autism, when upset, is threatening to run away from home, and that this is happening often. I'm not sure how to deal with this. I have recently reread to her The Runaway Bunny and said I would never stop looking for her, but other than that, I'm unsure what to do or say. This is always in conjunction with saying hurtful things to usually me, things designed to elicit reaction or tears. Help, I'm just broken.
First, very important. First of all, my heart goes out to you. When we take seriously what our kids say, it can be the most painful thing. And I just want to assure you that there's no way on earth that your child actually means the things that they're saying. First of all, they definitely don't mean the hurtful things. And secondly, the child is not going to run away, but you need to do a few things, and we'll talk about it. And I think a lot of it has to do with how you think about this. So let's talk about that a little bit first. So first of all, one very important thing to know is that most of our children many of our kids do not have this ability to take someone else's perspective. This is called theory of mind, perspective taking. And our kids, I might as well just talk about the Sally Ann experiment and where all this came from. It's now almost, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago or maybe even more, where a researcher in Cambridge, Simon Baron-Cohen, did a research study where he essentially had several different groups of children looking at a video or cartoon, and the cartoon had two girls in it, Sally and Ann. And in this video, they're both in the room, and there's two objects. There's like a ball and, let's say, a book or whatever, and there's two containers, like a basket and a box. And So they're playing, and then one of the children leaves the room. Sally leaves the room, and when she's gone, Anne takes one of the objects, like let's say the ball, and moves it. So Sally had, let's say, placed the ball in the basket, and now she's gone. And Anne now takes the ball, plays with it a little bit, and then places it in the box. And then she goes and sits down again, and Sally comes back in. And obviously, if you or I were looking at this, and also the typically developing kids, 5-year-olds, average 5-year-olds, and also children with Down syndrome, and then there's a group of kids with autism. And the children with Down syndrome and the children who are typically developing, everyone was asked the question, where is Sally going to look for the ball, right? Because when she left, she had put the ball in the basket. And while she was gone, Anne had moved the ball to another location. So if you and I, or the typically developing kids, saw this, we would say, if we were asked the question, where's she going to look? Well, obviously, she's going to look where she put the ball, because she wasn't there when Anne moved it. So because she wasn't there, she didn't see that Anne moved the ball, right? And so the typically developing kids said that, and so did the children with Down syndrome. They all said she's going to look in the basket because that's where she put it. The interesting thing was the kids with autism predominantly said she's going to look in the new location, because they had seen that. They thought Sally knew it as well. If I know it, then Sally knows it as well. And this was the very beginning of a series of tests like this. This was called the Sally-Anne task. There's a few others similar to this. And this was the beginning of a bunch of research on this concept of theory of mind, which helped us identify that one of the biggest skills that is lacking in a large percentage of individuals with autism, this was a very big contribution, I would say, to the field, was that they do not have the ability to understand that their mind is separate from other people's minds. And that's why it's called theory of mind. So, you know, when typically developing, and even I or you, we have separate thoughts. So what's in our minds is different, and we don't know what the other person is thinking, right? So that's how our minds are different. In order for me to understand your experience of the world, I have to take your perspective, which means I have to be able to imagine what could possibly be going on in your mind. I don't know exactly, but I can infer what's going on in your mind, and you can infer what's going on in my mind. And a lot of the time we do that, right? It's a natural part of communication. It's a natural part of social behavior. And so I said all that because I want you to know that as a matter of fact, most of our children do not have the ability to understand someone else's perspective. This is something we teach them. This is something we work on very hard. In fact, one of our whole area of our skills curriculum is called cognition. That entire area has to do with lessons that are based on the concept of teaching someone to look at someone else's perspective. And let me tell you, a lot of different things are affected by this. Like, this is one of the reasons our kids aren't very good at telling jokes. Because how do you tell a joke? There has to be a punchline that you are holding back. Well, if it's in my mind, then there's no holding back. You probably know what's in my mind. Because people with this lack of theory of mind think that we share minds. Our minds are exactly the same. So if I know something, you know something. So for instance, I won't be able to hold back a punchline because you already know what it is. I won't be able to lie. Lying is a very kind of adaptive skill, actually, and I won't be able to lie because I think you know everything that's in my head. I will say things that might be hurtful because I won't understand how you could feel hurt. I don't feel hurt. How are you feeling hurt? It produces a very egocentric perspective of the world. It's like the only feelings, the only thoughts that really matter or that really exist are mine. And the assumption for the child is that everyone else feels and thinks the same as I do. And, you know, this explains so many different behaviors. So, and I won't go into a million examples of how theory of mind affects all areas of development, but for you, it's very important for you to know that your child doesn't know how they are, the words that they're saying are causing you this level of brokenness and heartbreak. They're not intending it at all. In fact, this is everything your child says, you have to just see from their perspective. You have to see it as a very egocentric communication. It's all about them most of the time. And what the child here is doing, what your child is doing, is simply attention seeking. They're just trying to get your attention. Now, there's a couple of things you have to do. First of all, don't read Runaway Bunny, because your child is probably misunderstanding some of the social nuances in the book, and it is perhaps a way that you communicate with each other. It's maybe a fun interaction for the child, and the child then thinks, oh, okay, maybe I should continue talking about running away, that sort of thing, because hey, when we were talking about it in the context of Runaway Bunny, we were having a great social interaction, Mom and I, so why not talk about me running away, and it could be the same thing. So there's a lot of like faulty reasoning going on here. So this is not at all about you or about the child wanting to run away. I think that what you need to do is just change the subject, move on to other things, and don't engage on this subject. A lot of times our kids engage on a subject because they want to have conversation. They want to actually have social interaction with you, and believe me, they get your full attention when they say something that freaks you out. A lot of the time we don't attend, we're doing a million other things, etc., etc., and then the child will say something that's like so scary, and then we fully attend, and our kids pick up on that. And so very likely your child is trying to elicit your reaction. That's exactly right. So please give reaction to other types of conversation, and don't give reaction to this conversation. When your child does this, literally walk into the other room. You do not need to have any kind of reaction to this. Walk into the other room, come back a couple of minutes later and start talking about something else with your child with a major amount of reaction and attention to it. Start conditioning your child. Right now your child's conditioning you. And the way that it is working is that your child is like, oh, you know what, I kind of want to see that reaction again. So they'll say something, it'll elicit a reaction in you, and that's the cycle. Right. What you need to do is take control of that cycle. Don't give a reaction to something negative. Give a positive reaction and a very healthy and, strong social reaction to something positive.
There you go. All super advice.
In the meantime, please make sure that your house is safe, that there's fencing around your house, that maybe even have an alarm on the door. Like, I don't want parents in general to not ever think that their kids will not run away, but even leave. Like, if you're worried about running away, please make sure your house is locked. And so many of our kids do actually elope because they don't understand. They're not doing it. They just don't understand the lack of the dangers that are out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk about this and more of the questions that you guys are sending in. Stick with us.
Arts and craft activities are a great way to practice on skills you're already working on with your child. For the month of November, we'll be making a paper corn. The skill we're going to be focusing on with this activity is fine motor, more specifically the pincher grasp. You'll see why in just a moment. Depending on the skill level of your child, you can also have them help you fold the paper, trace the silhouette of the corn, or cut it out. It all depends on what you want to be focusing on today. The materials you'll be needing are paper, tissue paper, a pencil, glue, and a cup of water and paintbrush if you're using the wet glue, scissors, and a template you can download from our website at facebook.com/autism-live. And don't forget to like us while you're there, or you can always just draw it from your imagination. All right, let's start the activity. First I want to do is take my tissue paper I bought from the store and turn it into strips that I can then turn into squares. Again, they don't need to be perfect squares because we're going to be changing its form anyways in the end. All right, and as you can see, I've done it to several different colors. I cheated and they're all right here for me to use. All right, the next thing we want to do is to make the shape that we're going to be gluing all the kernels onto. I have my template that I already downloaded from facebook.com/autism-live, and now I'm going to use this to make the form that we're going to be gluing onto. I'm going to take one of my pieces of paper, I'm going to fold it in half. This way the corn will be symmetrical. Once it's been folded in half, I'm going to take my form and then I'm going to trace around it. And again, depending on your child's skill level, either you can do it or the child can do it. But again, the focus of this activity is the pincher grasp. All right, now that I have it traced, I'm going to cut it out. And ta-da! Here is my blank corn, but it's missing its kernels. So now that's what we're going to be working on. I'm going to use this glue, but you can always use a glue stick as well. The reason why I like this one is that it doesn't dry as fast. So I'm going to squeeze it all over my corn and then take my paintbrush, dip it in some water, and then smear it all over the corn. The next step is making the kernels. What your child is going to do is take one of the tissue squares and practice their pincher grasp. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. And once they have this, then they're going to place it onto the corn. And as you can see, it's got a lot of surface area to cover with these kernels, so lots of opportunities to practice their pincher grasp. And ta-da! It's done. As you can see, lots of opportunity to practice your child's pincher grasp. When you're finished, don't forget to share your pictures online at facebook.com/autism-live. I look forward to seeing them and see you soon. Bye.
Can you see me? Can you see me flying by your side?
Welcome back to Autism Live. We were having a discussion before about a mom with a child who has been saying some things to her that are pretty hurtful. And you know me, I always have something to say, and we kind of needed to go to break, so I didn't get to say, and so I'm just going to revisit that for just a second. That I remember, because there's a blessing in these things as well, and it's important, I think, to embrace the blessing part of it. I remember when Jem was really little, and one of my best friends has 3 very healthy neurotypical boys, and I was forever comparing, right? Because how can you not?
Of course.
And I would look at her 3 boys who are all in age around my child, and I would see all the things that they were doing, and sometimes it was really hurtful. And one day we were having a conversation, one of her boys had said, "I hate you, Mom," and slammed the door and went into the other room, and she called me and was, crying and saying, "It's just terrible, and you can't imagine how hurtful it is when your child says something really mean and terrible to you." And of course, for me, with a child who wasn't yet talking, it was like a dagger in my heart. And I said to her, because we're good enough friends, I said, "You know what? The truth is that
I wish she could say
I
that.
would wish that my kid could say something hurtful to get a rise out of me. And the day that my child says, I'm going to put it out into the universe, the day that my child says, 'I hate you,' I'm throwing a party on that day, because that will mean that he notices that it gets a reaction out of me, and that
so
he
true.
has enough language to do that.
That's such a good
And I'm
point.
going to say yippee skippy and do the happy dance when that happens. Now, I will tell you that there have been many occasions now where my child has said, 'I hate you,' and slammed the door and walked into the other room. And I did throw the little party the first time.
He
And-
never says, "I hate you." He's too sweet a guy.
He has said it, but not
That
anytime
way, yeah.
recently.
Yeah.
No, he's much more.
Oh, when he was
he's much
young
more-
and we were
yes.
forcing him to talk and all that. Right.
Right. No, I mean now it's much worse. He has too much ABA in him to
He's
say
just so
I hate
smart.
you. Now he'll say like, "I'm really disappointed in you." Right? Because he
the best.
right because he knows that I won't react if it's I hate you. He's not going to get the reaction, right? He
yeah.
understands how to play the game. But my point is, and that I want to lovingly say to you, is that I have had my feelings hurt now by my child. I know what that feels like too, and it feels like the worst. But I think it's super important as autism moms to make sure that you put things in the right category. And when they are verbally trying to get a rise out of you, like go to the happy place inside that takes ticker count of, oh, my child is aware enough to realize that gets a reaction out of me, and they have enough language to say that. Woohoo! And that, if you can, like, I think of sometimes that there are compartments inside that you can get into the compartment that sees that part of it, and it doesn't hurt as bad.
Absolutely right, Shannon. In fact, I'm really glad you said that, because I often tell people who come, sometimes when I see parents, they're just at their wits' end because the child has been almost torturing them with not just words, but winning every argument, you know, or winning every, and I tell them, I'm like, you have to realize being manipulative is an indication of intelligence. Like I love kids who are able to manipulate people in their world, because the children who are very hard to change are the ones who don't care.
Right.
And being able to like actually figure things out like that, like, oh, I could, you know, if I freak out right now, they'll let me go for a walk out of this classroom. You know, that's pretty intelligent.
It is. It is.
So, you know, you have to see it that way too. Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
So, you know, embrace that part of it. I don't in any way mean to minimize that it hurts. But now that you know that they really don't get that part of it, that all they get is what behavior you do as a result of it, then all you have to do is change the behavior.
Absolutely right.
So I always had a thing, I believe it is still there on our mirror, that says reward the good behavior and ignore the bad behavior.
Absolutely.
Which is the really, you know, I mean, it's kind of the simplistic, and it isn't always the completely accurate, but for my simplistic mind in the moment, when I'm upset, that's the thing that I have to remember.
Yeah,
reward the good behavior, walk away from the stuff that isn't what you want as much as possible.
That's right.
Okay, moving on. We've had a lot of people asking questions and asking in different locations. This one is, what physicians in the Riverside, California area are knowledgeable in medications that are used to treat children on the ASD spectrum who have frequent meltdowns and aggressive behavior? Now, we get this question, but we get it for pockets all over the place. More and more parents are asking for, what's the medication to deal with meltdown and the aggressive behavior?
And this is a really important question, and I'm glad you reread it, because at first I was going to answer it one way and now I'm going to answer it differently. So here's the thing. First of all, if you're looking for physicians for various reasons, I want to give you a resource, and that resource is to go online and look at MAPS. I believe all the physicians who have any kind of training in regards to the biochemical issues of autism are the MAPS doctors, MAPS. This is about biochemistry. So this is about kids who have issues with sleep, with agitation, with gastrointestinal inflammation, with various things. And so that's where you can look at. But meltdowns and aggressive behavior are not a symptom of autism. I want to be really, really clear about this. Autism has meltdowns and aggressive behavior, tantrums, hitting, spitting, throwing, biting. None of that is a symptom of autism. All of those things are a side effect of not being able to communicate appropriately. So actually, all of those things are forms of communication. So when someone has a meltdown, if they had words, they would say something like, you know, I wish I didn't have to do this, or please don't make me do this, or give me 5 more minutes, I don't want to stop right now, or whatever it is. Instead, they have a meltdown, and because they have a meltdown, they extend the period of time, and or they get a reaction out of the person, and this is where functions of behavior comes in. But what I'm trying to say is that things like meltdown and aggressive behavior are simply behaviors. These are behaviors that need to be changed. They are not changed by medication. Here's what medication, there are behaviors, there's no question, there are medications that will numb and reduce your abilities to such an extent that you will not have any kind of meltdowns, pretty much because you're almost in a vegetative state. So there are medications that will just calm you down and turn you into kind of a zombie. There's no question there are medications like that. And in the old days, obviously, they would use those types of medications for anyone in, let's say, a mental institution who would have a meltdown, right? Because they couldn't handle it and they didn't know anything about functional behavior in those days, and they would just medicate it. Medicating behavior is like, let's say you have a really, really bad recurring headache every day, and nobody really cares what the cause is. You just want to get rid of the pain. So what you do is you take Tylenol, right? Or Advil or whatever it is. What you're doing, Advil is a little bit different. Tylenol, you just take acetaminophen. What it does is you're essentially numbing the pain. You're closing off the receptors that feel pain. You're not dealing with what's causing it to begin with. And the same thing could be done in autism, which is you could numb the individual so that they are not reacting to anything in their environment, positive or negative, by taking some sort of medication. Or you could figure out what is the cause of it and then fix that. So what you have to do, if your child's having a lot of frequent meltdowns and aggressive behavior, you have to do what's called a functional behavior assessment. Functional behavior assessment is where a behavior analyst comes in and says, let me look at the scenario here. Let me figure out what the person is trying to communicate by having these meltdowns. What's the function of this meltdown? What's the reason for this meltdown or this aggressive behavior? And there's lots of different reasons. For example, I might come to a child who's playing with a toy, and I might say, I'm going to take that toy away from you now. And I grab the toy, the child will freak out, get aggressive, and hit me. Okay, so that is one function where the child is now losing a tangible object that they really wanted to play with. Or I could come in and I could tell the child, you need to do something. You need to work now. And the child doesn't want to work and they hit me. Okay, so that's a demand function where I'm placing a demand on the child to do something. I could be just sitting with the child and the child hits me because they're trying to get my attention. The child could be frustrated from the environment in the classroom and they could want to hit me because they want to escape the environment. There's a lot of different reasons a child might hit or have aggressive behavior, and you have to figure out what it is. What is the reason for the meltdown? And then what you do is very simple. You don't give in for that particular reason. In fact, you teach the child how to use their words or some other form of communication instead of having the meltdown. So let's say a child doesn't want to do the work that has been told them they have to do and they have a meltdown. Well, what you do is you don't stop the work simply because they had a meltdown. In fact, instead, you teach the child to ask for a break. And if they ask for a break, then you'll stop. But if they have a meltdown, you don't stop. So the child starts to think, oh, meltdowns aren't effective anymore, so I'm going to stop them. That's the real issue here. The issue for you, it's the same advice we gave to the prior mom, essentially. It's like we told the prior mom, don't react to the thing, which is don't reinforce the behavior of talking about running away. It's the same thing to you. You need to figure out what the meltdown is actually trying to communicate. Teach the child a more appropriate way to communicate that thing. And then when the meltdown occurs, don't give in, don't react, and don't give the child what they're expecting. Prompt the child instead to use appropriate communication. And that's how meltdowns are dealt with. But I do, if your child's having frequent meltdowns and aggressive behavior, often it's multiple functions. So they might be enjoying the attention and they really want to get away. And that kind of stuff becomes very hard for someone to deal with unless you're very well trained. That's what behavior analysts do. They're very well trained in figuring out function of behavior and putting in place these very complex schedules that help our kids realize, this isn't working anymore, I better do something else. So get a BCBA, get a behavior analyst to do a functional behavior assessment. Your school can provide this, your insurance company can pay for this. There's lots of different ways that you can get that help.
Absolutely. But again,
and especially in California, oh my gosh, you're in Riverside. We're in Riverside.
Yeah.
We can do a functional behavior assessment for you. Get in touch with CARD.
yeah. But if in fact you're looking for medicine, we recommend that you go to MedMaps. I believe it's medmaps.org is their website to find doctors that know about autism and know how that works. But please,
Right, and
please get the behavioral intervention if it's
Absolutely.
these behaviors before you start looking at any kind of
Absolutely right,
medication.
right.
All right, we're going to take a short break and then we're going to be back with more questions. Stick with us.
What is autism? What is autism?
What is autism?
What is autism?
What is autism?
What is autism?
I've been asking myself that for a very, very long time.
Let me think about that one.
Trying to just
Let me think. Oh man, that's a rough one. Yes.
Autism,
Autism is a neurological disorder that affects many of our kids in different ways.
It's a learning disability that affects the cognitive functions of the brain.
A lot of people have the misconception that it's a disability, and it's really not.
I look at it as like a special gift.
When one person thinks differently from another.
It's an opportunity for everyone to learn to understand someone that's a little different than them. Autism is the ability to educate.
They're given so much talent in different areas.
To me, autism means a chance to be with and be around people you really care about. Autism is beautiful.
It's a way of seeing the world differently.
It's always unique, totally intelligent, and sometimes mysterious.
happiness that comes out of my son's hard work.
It's a movement.
Unpredictable.
That's right.
Awesome.
Love. The field I want to work in.
Laughter, fun, joy. Autism is beautiful to me.
I want you to remember these three words. There is hope.
A lot of adults don't really believe kids. They'll think, kids are kids, what are they talking about? But when a child stands up for what they believe in, it's so strong and powerful. I first got involved with autism advocacy 4 years ago when my friend was diagnosed. When I found out about my friend's diagnosis, I didn't really understand what it meant. But it didn't matter to me or change our friendship. I didn't look at her any differently. We still had so much fun together. Now I know that she experiences life a little differently than me, and that's okay. Knowing what she goes through has helped me to understand and be more caring towards other people in similar situations. I got involved with ACT Today because I wanted to do whatever I could to help. They provide options like behavioral therapy, medical care, social skills programs, assistance to military families, and much more. Being there for my friend was my #1 priority. I've been volunteering and spreading the word about the cause via my social media platform because raising awareness is a crucial first step. There needs to be more kids and teens involved to make sure that our voices are heard just as loudly as the adults. You may be small like me, but your acts of kindness are not.
Welcome back to Ask Dr. Doreen. We're here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh, and she's answering your questions in real time. We wanted to go to a question that had come in that concerns me. My son is 10 and on the spectrum. I'm working on not getting into power struggles with him, but he will refuse to eat dinner even if it's something that he likes. His doctors are concerned about his weight and encourage him to eat. He says he hears a voice that tells him not to eat. We cut down on after-school snacks to increase his appetite. He will sit for hours with food on his plate and not touch it, then go sneak food in the middle of the night. I make him meals he likes, but he will say he doesn't like the food anymore, or there will be one ingredient that he doesn't like and refuse the entire meal. Teachers say he barely eats his lunch at school. This is driving me crazy. Is this a control thing? They want to know. And how can I get him to eat?
So it could be a variety of things. It could be a control thing, definitely. It's funny because I used to talk to some of our high-level BCBAs who were here, and we would talk about the main 4 functions of behavior, and I would always say the field doesn't recognize that one of the biggest functions of behavior is just control. It isn't one of our functions, right? It's tangible, etc. But control to me is a huge function. In fact, yesterday I had one of my kids here who I used to treat when she was 2, and she's 27 now. And she's pretty, she used to be nonverbal, Mom told. I didn't remember, but she's telling me she was nonverbal when I had her at 2. But, you know, now she's a very high-functioning, going to college Asperger's individual and doing really well. But a lot of her issues are about control. And control is a really important thing, and I don't think people give it enough value, because it has a lot to do with how, you know, sometimes with individuals with special needs, we take away their control, and we just either make so many decisions for them, or don't ask their opinion, don't try to get their opinion, and we just make assumptions, because we sort of have to in some ways. But it ends up being that very capable individuals are overlooked in terms of their own decision-making ability, and then it's just like, I know better, so I have to control things. So the individual ends up like just wanting to control anything, you know, just give me control over anything. And this actually ends up sometimes in illnesses such as encopresis, you know, where the individual is holding their own bowel movement just because they can, that's the only thing they're left with. So with this, it could be a control thing, absolutely. But there's 2 things I want to say about this. Obviously, you could ignore this if it isn't a major issue. In other words, first of all, lock the food up so that he cannot access and sneak food in the middle of the night. That's number 1, because he's basically getting to food, which means he's not hungry necessarily as well. So do not leave any food out, lock the cabinets. There will be no sneaking of food at night. That's number 1. Now we have a hungry individual, and we will understand if the control function and the reinforcers he gets from controlling the situation are stronger, or his urge for hunger, his hunger urge becomes stronger, one or the other. But what's very important is what I would do is I would lock up all the food so he doesn't have access to it, and then I would make dinner, place it in front of him, and walk away. And that's it. If he wants to eat it, great. If he doesn't want to eat it, that's fine too. And you just keep doing that day after day. And if he really doesn't get access to other food, you have to make sure he doesn't have access to other people's food at school, because that has to be the only food he has access to. Now, if people are really concerned about his weight, it might already be too late, and you might not be able to do what I'm telling you to do, because his weight is now so low that intervention is required. ABA people do, one of the things we do is feeding. And feeding is a very important thing, and it's not something that can be taken lightly. If it's just a control thing, and if it's not too late in the game, in other words, he's not too thin, then you can do what I told you, and it should work after a few days. If it is either not a control thing, or he is already way too thin, you need to get a professional in place. And when you get a BCBA who knows how to do feeding, what they will do is they will do they'll do an assessment, first of all, to identify the function. They'll figure out if it is control or not, or whatever it is. But then more importantly, it could be other things. For instance, it could be a texture thing. Like some of our kids who stop eating, it's because they don't like the texture of various foods. Some of our kids just become overly picky eaters. This is more, in my mind, it initiates with some sort of biochemical issue, and then it generalizes. So in other words, I think kids who have become very, very picky are the kids who, at some point in the past, so you know, like how if you go out to a restaurant and you eat something, and you don't feel very well, it makes you bloated or whatever it is. Let's say you have Mexican food, and it causes you to be bloated. So next time you'll remember, I don't really want Mexican. I'm not good with Mexican food. But what happens is it might even generalize. So like, let's say you might think, in the Mexican food that I had, there were black beans. And you know what, it's the black beans that makes me feel bloated. But just to be safe, I'm going to stay away from all kinds of beans. I'm going to stay away from pinto beans and also garbanzos, and maybe garbanzos will now generalize even further to maybe I should also stay away from other types of grains. And it starts to generalize and become broader than just the black beans, okay? Now with kids, what happens is they don't know categories of foods or stuff like that. So what they do is they generalize by either texture or color or something like that. So it'll be like, you know, those peas tasted horrible, so I'm going to stay away from, and this is all subconscious thinking, I'm going to stay from everything that's green. Like, I'm just not going to eat things that are green. So because that not only tasted horrible, but it made me feel bad, whatever it is. So they generalize, but it starts always with something that didn't feel so right to you. So that's my theory about how pickiness develops. Now, sometimes our kids are very, very picky because they're obsessive compulsive. So those are children who will separate the dish into like 3 exact parts, and this part can't touch this part, and I will eat this first, and then I will eat this, and I will only eat it in that order. And that's just control again. That's obsessive compulsive disorder is all about control. So it's really just about like, I need to do it in this order. If I don't do it in this order, the world will fall apart. That's another faulty issue which has to be dealt with through cognitive behavior therapy. So really what I would suggest is, you know, if your child is not really underweight right now and it's not dangerous, then I would definitely lock up the food and make sure you communicate with school and just give him his meals, and that's that. And don't worry too much, just make sure there's something in the meals that he likes. Later on we can talk about generalizing to foods he doesn't like, because, you know, that's important too. But, and if that doesn't work, or if you can't do it because he's already too underweight, get in touch with a BCBA who can do a full feeding program. Now, once they've established the function, and if it's texture or whatever color, or if it's control or whatever it is, they do a very graduated introduction to foods, and they do reinforcement, things you can't think about. So for instance, if the child is eating, then the TV can be on. If the child is not eating, there will be no TV. You know, there's very little subtle things like that where the child starts to establish a reinforcement thing with eating. And so these are the things you have to do. And, you know, I don't know enough about your child to recommend you do it on your own. I think if you can access a BCBA, it's always going to go smoother.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back with yet another feeding question that's coming from our West Virginia mom. So stick with us. Hi, I'm Shannon Penrod, and we're at the ABCs and XYZs of Special Needs Conference. And this year, for the first time, they've got something really remarkable. It's the Entrepreneurial Boutique. These are all items that have been made and are being sold by individuals who have special needs. So we're going to do a little shopping and talk to some of these fabulous entrepreneurs. Come on.
My name is Molly Rarick, and I'm founder of Breed's Gift. We're a nonprofit that serves teens and adults with special needs, like Chase here. We were founded in 2013 and serve people in the Conejo Valley, Santa Barbara, and LA.
Our main objective is to give our participants the skills they need to gain a more independent life.
My name is Shelley Cox, and Lisa Zalagi and I are founders of Creative Steps and Create Micro-Business Enterprises. And the items that we're selling here today are all made by the clients who have passions about what they want to make, and then they get the profits from what they make after we've paid all of the other expenses.
We are here today because my goal is to be independent, and also I would like to share all my artwork, and I would like to sell.
Thinking about at his young age being a businessman, you know, it's amazing. I cannot be more proud.
Is that your smile? I've been looking at you forever, yet I never saw you before. Are these your hands?
as a celebrity, whatever that means, you want to do what you can to give back. The way I've always looked at it, if I'm available, I'm going to be there. And when you get there and you see what folks are doing and the lives that they're touching, how can you not want to continue to be a part of it?
And for the first time, I am looking in your eyes.
What can we all do to make a difference? Not only with trying to find a cure, but to help the children and the families that may not have the resources for these kids.
When you're looking back at me, now I understand what...
None of us are doing enough, but I think that we're doing as much as we possibly can. Because we all live in society, and the more we can all do to help society, the more it helps all of us.
And for the first time, I am looking in your eyes. And for the first time, I'm seeing who you are. I can't believe how much I see when you're looking back at me. Now I understand what love is. Love is for the first time.
Welcome back to Autism Live and Ask Dr. Doreen. We're here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh, and she is answering your questions. Now, we had a question. We've been talking about food, so let's go to the next one. Hello, Shannon and Dr. Doreen. West Virginia mom again. Haha, she says. I have a pretty gross situation I need advice on. We like gross situations. We talk about it all here. I've been working with my son on feeding. He's almost 4, high functioning, but has very restrictive behaviors, I think is what that says, and has difficulty with textures in food. His diet now is limited to breakfast, having waffles, lunch, peanut butter sandwich, and salt and vinegar chips, and the same for dinner. If I introduce a new food, I typically just have it on the table for a few days, then his plate, then ask him to try it. This always ends up in him throwing up until this week. I had my light bulb moment and realized I'm reinforcing the throwing up because that's what makes me quit asking him to try a bite of the new food. The foods I'm having him try are ones he used to eat in the last few months. We've ruled out medical reasons for the behavior. Do I push through the puke? If not, how do I proceed? And thanks in advance. What a phrase. Do I push through the puke? But I get what you mean.
And you're an amazing mom, and I love being able to give you feedback. But if a child has gotten to the point where they're actually throwing up, I don't think you should be intervening. I think you need a BCBA in place. It's no joke when you do a feeding program. And there's so many factors to a feeding program, and I can just point out some things here for you, for instance. So a child who's eating waffles, PBJs, and salt and vinegar chips, that is already 3 different textures right there. So, or 4 even. So I don't really know which texture it is that he's averse to or likes, because he's already eating 4. That's number 1. So that's a problem. Because when you deal with textures, you start with the softest or most favorite, and then you gradually increase the texture. But chips is a very hard texture here, and he's already into that. Also, in terms of taste, salt and vinegar, intense taste. Not too many people can handle salt and vinegar chips. But on the other hand, he's also having very sweet taste like PBJ. So there's something off here. Like, we need to figure out his baseline. Secondly, you're absolutely right. By throwing up or gagging even, I don't know how far he's going, he's telling you, this is not what I want, and then probably what you're doing is giving him something else, because we always worry about our kids' diet. This is one of the reasons that I always recommend feeding be something that a professional works on, because there's too much emotion around food. At least I know for me, Iranian mom, I'm like feeding my kids all the time, right? It's like you think part of giving love is giving them food.
Absolutely.
And that's just contrary sometimes to letting our kids not eat. So I've worked very hard on conditioning myself and not ever forcing my kids to eat anything. I just make the food. If they want it, great. If they don't, they don't, and that's up to them. But with our kids, it becomes a very big issue here. You need to have, I would really recommend that you have some professional help. I don't know if you have access to professional help there in West Virginia. If you don't and you really want to do this, then I would recommend that you go on the IBT website, Institute for Behavior Training. I think they have a feeding module, and you need to look at it in depth, because we're talking about a very, very structured program where there is reinforcement. Like, for instance, you have a morsel, a tiny morsel of a food that you want the individual to learn to eat, reinforced by a large amount of the food he wants. And then that morsel gradually, very gradually increases as this other stuff decreases. And then meanwhile, every time he takes a tiny bit of morsel, you have major reinforcers going on, like TV is turned on. It's off when he tantrums, throws the food, or does anything else. It's a pretty structured program. I don't really feel comfortable guiding you through it just on this program, because it's not like, you know, it would be like me trying to teach you how to do all ABA. It's a very structured, very intense program of feeding. So please try to get professional help, and if not, go on the IBT website and see. I think they do have a feeding program. If not, it's going to be one that I tell them to work on.
Is it something that CARD telehealth could do? Can you do telehealth with feeding?
Well, I mean, it's a step-by-step thing, but certainly I'd rather, you know, if there's no other option, I'd rather do telehealth with you than not.
Okay.
Because it's every step of the way. It's just that, you know, it's a sensitive issue. It's like the first interaction with a child where they tantrum a lot. And it's very difficult to tell a parent, to walk a parent through that, because it's such an emotional reaction when your child tantrums.
Yeah.
And feeding, I mean, we have kids who are like throwing everything when they start, and in you know, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or a month of it, they're sitting there enjoying their food.
Okay. I want to move, because we're out of time, but I want to move to just the mom who wrote to us last week specifically about biting that we started the show talking about. She said, this is the mom who asked about the biting last week. Thank you so much. He is absolutely doing it to scare me or get a reaction out of me, because if I don't watch him, he won't do it.
Wonderful.
I turn my head away really quickly or close his bedroom door and he stops.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
That's excellent. I'm so happy to hear that. And that's why I think it's really important people realize the difference between the core self-injurious behavior. Your child doesn't have self-injurious behavior. He's just figured out how to get your attention, and that shows intelligence, as I said.
It does, and it also shows that there's a very specific way of working at it and on it. And so often as moms, we get afraid, right? We see our kids doing something and we get afraid. Even going back to the mom who was saying that her child says that he hears a voice who says, "Don't eat it," and that scares us. We're like, "Oh no, what does that mean? He's hearing voices." Although we all have an inner dialogue,
hear voices.
right?
We all
all
hear
the time.
voices, yes.
Our kids just don't have a reference for it, but we hear our kids say that and we think, "Oh no, could this be a dual diagnosis
or something?" Right,
of something, you know, and, you know, and what's going to happen now? So it's so helpful when we have the opportunity to talk to you and you have us look at something and go, is it happening this way or is it happening that way? Because that can give us a fearectomy.
Absolutely.
Just like separate the fear out and then we can get to work.
Absolutely. And I want to give you one other feedback now, since you're listening. Now you've accomplished phase 1, which is very important. Now phase 2, which we often forget, is even more important. Now what you have to do is go into his room and give him attention when he's not self-injurious, when he's not doing that biting or something like that. So at different times, you need to now, every time you take attention away from something, you need to balance out the reinforcer, because remember now you've reduced his reinforcers, right? He was getting reinforcement from your attention. Yeah. Now you've taken that away, so make sure now you start attending again for something positive.
Yay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That's so great. I'm glad it worked.